You can say it however you want.
Okay, today we're here with Anthony Molinaro, and he's going to talk a little bit about his experience as a music educator. So you can go ahead, Anthony.
Sure. Well, let's see. I can go back pretty far talking about it, but I'll start by saying that my father was a music educator and taught middle school choir and then orchestra.
Wow.
And I always enjoyed tagging along with him and went through his program and just it seemed like an attractive lifestyle and loved music. And so I studied music education at Duquesne University. And then I went off and I was actually trying to slag it as a career as a bassist. So I was trying to be a musician for a little while. And it wasn't too long, though, that I realized that, teaching was really a real satisfying thing for me to do. So I started focusing on that. That was in San Diego, California. I moved out there. Nice. And so I taught for the first 7 or 8 years in the San Diego Unified School District.
Nice.
I taught elementary instrumental music. And it was real interesting because I never student taught. So because in San Diego they had a program, because I had my degree in music ed, but I didn't get the student teaching. I didn't have a certification, but they had a program in San Diego because they needed teachers so bad that they would help you get your certification, but you were just teaching while you were doing it. And so that was cool, except for the fact that going in, I was like, I didn't know what I was doing. And my first few years were rough, trying to figure out how to teach. And especially in some of the populations I was teaching. Like in Southeast San Diego, many students didn't speak English, or it was very interesting to try to navigate teaching under those conditions. But I think ultimately it made me a better teacher.
Yeah.
And so after life's twists and turns, I ended up moving back to Pittsburgh, and I got a job teaching elementary general choral in a school district outside of Pittsburgh, and I became reacquainted with Dalcroze Eurythmics.
Nice.
So I studied Eurythmics at Carnegie Mellon University while I was teaching, eventually earning my certification, eventually becoming the board chair of the Dalcroze Society of America, and becoming a sort of lecturing eurythmic specialist. And that has been, I think, my sort of niche in the music ed space has been in figuring out how to use Dalcroze Eurythmics principles in like a public school regular teaching practice, which is not super common. And that has had many challenges associated with it, but I've really enjoyed figuring out that process. And for instance, in my school, like in my classroom, in my public school, the children don't wear shoes. And this is a Eurythmics tradition. And, just that little detail there was really like difficult for people to wrap their heads around, right? Like, so wait, why do they take their shoes off? Like, that's still something that they all focus on anytime anybody talks about it. Like, what do you remember about Mr. Molinaro's class? It's like, oh, well, we take our shoes off.
That's hilarious.
So now sort of my project has been to try to find ways to share the, experiences and the findings that I've had in this journey of having a really like traditional Dalcroze class in a public school. And that's been sort of my current project. And into that end, I've got a Substack I write at musicxt.substack.com. And then I've got a podcast called The New Dalcrozian that I do with some other Dalcrozian friends of mine. These are ways that I've been, trying to sort of, share. What are the ways I can share this stuff? It's tricky to do. So.
So with your experience with the Dalcroze Eurythmics, like, what are some tips that you have for educators that are wanting to incorporate this in their classrooms in public schools?
Sure. Yeah, I love to talk about this. So I think there's a couple of things that like are convenient to start with. And one of them has to do with, I think, the difference between musical movement, or maybe, let me not say difference, but let me just say that like there is a degree of musicality in movement, right? And I think teachers are getting better at incorporating movement, period.
Yeah.
I see a lot of teachers, it's almost like it's a consensus now that like your kids should be moving a lot.
Yes.
Which is great because it wasn't always that way, right? But I would edit it a little bit and say like we need to start thinking about the quality of the movement.
Yes.
And I would say that there's a really good place to begin. Are you thinking about making that movement more musical instead of just, well, it's good that they were moving along with the music. Moving along with the music is much different than actually, embodying music in your movement.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things in eurythmics practice that we're like super obsessed with, right? And that I think is, if I was gonna, offer somebody a path towards better movement, that would be the first thing, is to say, ask yourself that question. Like, how musically are they moving? And do you understand that there's a difference? Can you recognize it?
Yeah.
And maybe that is a good place to start, is with your own sort of, instinct for movement. Yeah. Right. And so the best way to get that is to get some kind of training, some kind of movement training in eurythmics or otherwise.
Yeah.
But, that would be my first tip, would be to ask yourself that question. Is the movement, is it enough to just say, oh, we're doing body percussion? Okay, all right, okay. But how musical is it? And that's tough. That's a tough distinction to make.
Yes.
And so I encourage people to try to start to recognize that and to start to figure out, what are the qualities of the movement that we can recognize. So one example I always start with is clapping. So everyone claps in their music class, right? This clap. Right, okay, that's great. Wonderful clapping. Okay, good. Everyone claps. But this is not a terribly musical thing, right?
Yeah.
Like this kind of motion is like it's just not, right? So, and you would never do that on your instrument. You would never, right? So how can you make a clap feel like it's got a connected line to it? So it doesn't feel like, but it feels like, right? Are you musicking with that movement?
Yes.
And if you're not, then maybe, there's some strategies that you can start to incorporate. Yeah. So anyway, if somebody's saying, well, I do movement, it's like, you do, and that's great, and you should. But that's good. But maybe, just maybe, you should think about how musically they're moving. And there you go. There's your first step on this huge journey that I'm still scrambling after.
Yeah. So how have you enjoyed your research in this and your podcast? How's all that been going for you?
No, it's so invigorating and illuminating to have these conversations on the podcast or to write on the Substack and get conversations going about this stuff. It's everything, really. I think that the Dalcroze community has been somewhat cloistered over the years. It's sort of like this very enigmatic kind of closed off sort of thing for people. It's almost like people I kind of know what it is, but those people they're onto something that I don't quite understand. And so there's been a sense of that in music education more broadly, is that Dalcroze is this little bit different enigmatic thing over here. It's cool, but we don't really quite Orff and Kodai are way easier to get your head around. They make a ton of sense in really clear ways. Here's what you teach. This. Here's the songs that you do, and here's the way you do it, right? And Dalcroze isn't so much that way, And so figuring out how to have these conversations in a way that is accessible is been super fun. And bring there's these Dalcroze practitioners, when you get into the scene, like these people are like wizards. I mean, these people are like just amazing. And having the opportunity to get one of those folks, to myself for an hour to talk, along with my co-host Lauren Hudson, and then figure out what parts of what they're doing could be useful to like more mainstream music ed.
Yeah.
And that's been super duper great. I really enjoy that project.
Yeah. I'm sure it's been.
And then also sharing being able to share my own sort of, wizardry.
I'm sure it's been cool to have that own outlet as your own classroom to kind of bounce ideas off of and try with your kids and see.
Yes, yeah. I do look at my classroom as a little bit like a laboratory. And what's interesting is I teach a lot of different kind of populations of kids, right? So I teach at a public school, regular public school. Kids are like regular. And then I teach at Carnegie Mellon. I teach on Saturdays at their preparatory academy. And these kids are like whiz kids, right? These kids are like, they're like, they sign up for it and they're musically interested and they practice and they're very conscientious. Imagine that. And so it's like super great to have that population. And then this summer, I'm teaching at the Interlochen camp in Michigan. I don't know if you know about that, but it's like this like prestigious camp for like very talented kids. And these kids are like something. I mean, they're like some of them. These are the kids that are going on to Juilliard. These are the kids that are going on to, the top program. Some of them won't even go to school. They'll just go right into being musicians. They're like, some of them are super serious. And having the opportunity to like try out stuff with that population is exciting too. So the whole spectrum from like I have special ed classes in the public school that are just like totally different from these like very elite sort of populations. So
it would be cool to see the difference between.
Yeah, and figuring out, I get a lot of opportunities to try this stuff out. And I think it gives me some credibility as a speaker because it's like, sometimes I think, especially in the music ed space, like a lot of, no offense to like music ed, like professors, but a lot of them haven't been in a classroom maybe at all, and maybe not in 15 years. And maybe it was like in one little isolated population.
Exactly.
And so to bring somebody in who's been like, I've taught in Southeast San Diego, I've taught at Shady Side Academy and like very like, I've taught in a regular public school.
You're still teaching and you're using, what you're speaking about and learning about in your own classrooms. So that's
very practical.
Yeah. And it does give you definitely credibility on those topics. Yeah. So that's really interesting because I know when I was in music, like in my music classes for music ed, it was like, Dalcroze, that's a thing that people move and like it wasn't, talked about in those ways. So it's really cool to hear, especially from someone who's, into the Dalcroze, like
I'm super into it. It's like it's quasi embarrassing, like geekiness level.
You're like
I'm super into it. Like when I'm into like a I was taking some classes at Carnegie Mellon in the master's program, and like, I'm sure they got tired of like, oh, here comes Molinaro again with the Dalcroze stuff. It's like, well, in Dalcroze, I'm like, all right. Well, I'm trying to be a little bit more broad in my perspective, but it's still that's what I know.
Listen, people, this stuff works. So that's awesome. That's really cool. You have those avenues. So do you have any advice for new music educators or future music educators?
Yeah, sure. I think, well, especially in like the, first of all, my first advice I always have when pre-service teachers come and want to work with me, my first advice to them is to really, first of all, understand that elementary teaching is very, very serious and very, very important. Yes. And it's not a bunch of silly play games. And I think sometimes, like especially pre-service teachers, have it upside down. They think like the high school band director is like that's the real job, and like the elementary teacher is like an entry-level job. Yeah. And like no, that should not be the way it is. In fact, I would say maybe backwards. Like the elementary teacher needs to be real strong and really, really, really passionate about it. And I think that's my first advice. Always is like don't discount elementary as a serious way to go. And I take it very seriously. And I think it's really satisfying. So that's my first piece of advice. My second piece of advice is if you're going to teach elementary, because that's what I know, you should really try to adopt a methodology. I think it's cool that people do sort of mixed bag approaches, but I think you ought to be rooted pretty firmly in one of the methodologies, whether it's Dalcroze or Kodai or for whatever. I think root yourself down a little bit in that tradition. I think it'll really help you to know what you're doing. I sometimes feel like this wandering around and like we'll do bucket drumming and we'll play ukuleles and then we'll that's fine, it's great. I don't think any of those things are bad, but I think like maybe teach ukuleles but like rooted in a Kodai tradition or something like that. Like that's like that to me is a little stronger teaching. I'm always a little bit more impressed by teaching that's rooted in a tradition and then branches out into other things. So that's always my advice to at least in the elementary.
Yes. Yeah. I think those are great pieces of advice. What tips do you have that maybe helped you get to where you are and be successful in your career?
Well, I would say that it's a journey and you have to really kind of be where you're at in the journey and take it as it comes. Like I mentioned before, when I first started out, I really struggled. It was really, really rough. My first couple of years, I had no classroom management chops. Yeah. And the kids were just destroying me every day. And I really, really struggled to get my feet under me. But maybe my own stubbornness or maybe I just wasn't going to quit. I just don't have that sort of instinct. Yeah. And, being that I grew up around it, I'm like, I know I can do this. I just can't, I don't know what my block was, but figuring out classroom management was an important component for me. Yeah. And I have a ton of thoughts about that, but that figuring that out was tough. But then once I got that, then it really started to be enjoyable. And now the classroom management's just a reflex for me. I don't even really think about it. It's just something I can do. Wow. And you can start to really start to play with some really interesting things with the kids. And now I'm at the point where I really think of myself I think of my teaching as my art. I think about my classes as being beautiful in and of themselves. It's not so much about learning outcomes as it is at creating a beautiful moment, right, for these students. And so it's been an arc from the beginning of just tripping over my own feet in dumpster fire every day till now it's sometimes I think it's wow, that was beautiful. Yeah. And so that is a whole arc. And I think you have to really do the work to to have that same sort of progression.
I love that. I think those are great words of advice. And then my last question is, what is one of your favorite memories as a music educator or experiences?
Let me think about this. So my favorite memories or experiences, well, I could think of so many, but I would say that I put together a program. So one of the things I think that's challenging about the Dalcroze method is it's such a process-based way of teaching. Yeah. There's not necessarily a clear product, right? Yes. If you're the type of music teacher who just teaches them a bunch of songs, at the end of the year, you can perform all your songs. You know what I'm saying? It's very easy to get your product. Yes. And Eurythmics is challenging in that way because it doesn't really you don't really end up with the same kind of things. Yeah. So I wrote a show called The Story Never Ends. And it was a combination of movement activities that we performed and songs that I wrote and poems that I either sourced or wrote. And they were different little bedtime stories. Yeah. And and then I got to dedicate that program to my grandmother, who at the time was still living. She was 101.
Oh my God.
And she was a poet and a very artsy person. And so having that opportunity to perform that original work with my students and be able to dedicate it to my grandmother and be able to, and it was a beautiful program that really, that's something I'll never forget.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a great thing. Well, I really, really appreciate you taking time to do this and hearing about your experiences and your stories and your knowledge. So thank you so much for doing this for me.
Thank you, Abigail. My pleasure.
Well, have a good summer and good luck at your next school year. I think it'll be great.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I'll send you some of the links to some of my work, and you can
yes,
I'd
love to see that. And
do whatever you want with it. Spread it around.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Talk to you later. Bye.